Hey everybody, it is 10 a.m. on a Saturday morning, and that means you're listening to Chopping It Up on Crazy Country 105.9, one of the last truly independently, locally owned radio stations left in California, broadcasting live and local from the heart of the San Ynez Valley. And I am your host, Keith Saarloos of Saarloos & Sons Wine Company, located in Los Olivos, California. Today's guest is a man whose resume reads less like a career and more like Forrest Gump tour through some of the most important moments in American history. Dennis Patrick has sat in rooms where decisions were made that changed the very way American communities communicate. He served as President Ronald Reagan's White House staff before becoming the chairman of the FCC, where he oversaw the most important and consequential eras in the communications history, including the breakup of AT&T and major changes to broadcasting regulations that transformed TV, radio, and the emerging media landscape. Then, because apparently that wasn't enough, he jumped into the private sector and helped lead some of the biggest media companies on earth: Time Warner, AOL, National Geographic. He helped launch the cable networks, navigate the dawn of the internet age, and expand one of the most recognized media brands in the world. And then, in a move that only makes sense after you've lived a life, he traded Washington, D.C. and Manhattan ballrooms for a ranch in the San Ynez Valley. Today, Dennis raises cattle, drinks coffee, wrangles alpacas and camels, writes books, and somehow found time to write a novel called San Ynez, a story rooted right here in a valley we all love. Now, I've interviewed winemakers, ranchers, politicians, musicians, entrepreneurs, pastors, and a whole cast of local characters on this show, but I can honestly say this is the first time I've ever had the opportunity to sit down with a former chairman of the FCC. Today, we're going to talk about Reagan, Washington, free speech, media, cable television, AOL, National Geographic, ranching, writing, the San Ynez Valley, and what happens to a man when he spends his lifetime shaping industries before he decides to build a life under an oak tree instead. Dennis Patrick, welcome to Chopping It Up. Mr. Patrick, thank you for joining us on Chopping It Up. How are you doing today?
I'm doing very well. Good to be here.
Okay, where do we start?
Wherever you want.
Where'd you grow up?
I grew up in Los Angeles, California.
In the city of?
In the city of.
No kidding.
Born in Eagle Rock, which was very much a blue-collar sort of
Yes.
working-class community when I was there. My dad was a Los Angeles police officer.
Really? My wife's grandfather built that house, that concrete house that's built in the side of the wall in Eagle Rock.
Really?
Yes.
I know exactly where that is.
It's a historical home. He was a engineer and worked with concrete and a bunch of other stuff, and bought a piece of property that was basically, they said you couldn't build on it, and decided to build on it.
He did it anyway.
He did it anyway.
That's good.
Okay. So Eagle Rock, you grew up, son of an officer.
Son of a police officer, yeah. Went to school there, and we moved to Orange County after that. Grew up in Huntington Beach.
Oh, did you really?
Yeah. So Huntington Beach.
Were you an Oiler?
I was Huntington Beach Oiler. Wow, not a lot of people know that.
I'm a Long Beach kid.
Okay, yeah, okay. I was an Oiler, and then for college I went back to L.A. I went to Occidental College and then UCLA Law School.
Really? So we kind of led with a bunch of different things that you've done in your life. Let's go to Reagan, our most famous resident. How did you get involved with the Reagan presidency?
It really goes back to law school. I clerked for a guy named William P. Clark.
That sounds familiar.
Well, it should. Bill Clark was certainly a resident in California, a cowboy, and he was on the California Supreme Court for a period of time, had been appointed by Governor Reagan. He'd been involved in Reagan's first gubernatorial campaign. And after Governor Reagan was elected, Bill joined the staff and really was the guy that hired a bunch of persons that later became quite famous and that I got to know in Washington, guys like Ed Meats, Cap Weinberger, et cetera. So getting back to my journey and how I ended up at the White House, Bill was appointed by Reagan to the California Supreme Court, and while I was in law school, I had the opportunity to clerk for him. Now this was in '76, so a number of years went by between '76 and '80. The president was elected in '80. He leaned on Bill to come back and become the Deputy Secretary of State, which is a funny story in and of itself. The president didn't know Al Haig very well and really wanted a trusted hand at the number 2 spot. So he got Bill to come back, and Bill, out of the blue, called me and said, "Hey, you want to go to the White House?"
Unbelievable. How old were you?
Well, this was 1981. I was just 30.
What was that phone call like?
Well, it was a little shocking. I remembered that. I remember now that when I got that phone call, I'd been out partying the night before, so I wasn't in tip-top shape to be receiving that phone call, which was a little awkward. But he asked whether I wanted to go back and join the White House staff. Bill wanted some people that he knew, some Californians, to be at the White House with, as he always referred to the president, the governor. He never heard him refer to him other than as the governor or the boss. So he wanted to have some people that he knew and trusted at the White House, and I was lucky enough to get that opportunity. I was practicing law in downtown LA at the time, and I was a tad bored, so I took a flyer.
Wow. So did we skip over anything between Huntington Beach and getting that phone call that we should touch on?
Well, I was an astronaut for a while during that period. No, I
just... What? Oh, come on. Oh,
I just made that up, Keith.
You had me on the ropes. I was like, oh, my gosh, this is amazing.
I made that up.
By the way, I think you should do that every time. That's fantastic.
Yeah. So, no, it was law school, practicing law, get the call. I had... I had a good career potentially, laid out in the practice of laws with a good firm. And so it was, in retrospect, it seems like a very easy decision. Well, who wouldn't go to the White House? But at the time, I was focused on the practice of law, and it was going well at this firm. And I was really taking a flyer because the position I took at the White House was not a legal position. I wasn't hired as a lawyer.
Mm-hmm. So you pack your bags, you head east.
I headed east.
You headed east. My daughter is currently working in Washington, D.C. this summer, and we're about to go see her for the 60th of our country. So 50 years later, my daughter's walking on the same ground you are.
Yeah, well, and it's an exciting, obviously, transition to make. I remember that when I arrived in November of the first year of the president's 2 terms. Of course, he was president between 1981 and 1989. And I remember arriving in November, and I had nothing but summer suits that I had worn in Los Angeles, and it was shockingly cold.
So tell us a little bit more about that presidency and you walking in those halls.
People ask me what Reagan was like. I had the good fortune of getting to know the president, Keith, and I say, when I say that, people think, well, gee, of course, you were on the White House staff, you knew the president, but that's not really.
Yeah. You can work at the company, you don't know the boss.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, it doesn't necessarily follow that you're going to know the president, but I was friends with the Wick family, and the Wick family were personal friends of the president. So when the president and Nancy wanted to get together with old friends and put politics aside, the Wicks were usually there, and if the Wicks were there, I was there. So I did get to know the president, and that's a long way of answering your question, or answering this issue of what Reagan was really like. I always say that Reagan was exactly like you would expect him to be, exactly how you would expect him to be based upon the way he appeared in public. He wasn't any different in private than he was in public. Now, what do I mean by that? He was affable. He never had a bad word to speak of anyone, even his opponents. I mean, he clearly held his view of the world in a strong and well-developed way. But he wouldn't really badmouth anybody. He'd say, "Well, we'll lead them to the light. We'll change their view. We'll just get them to come around. Tip's not a bad guy." Yeah. So the first thing, never heard him badmouth anybody. He's a hell of a nice guy. always had a joke. You know, he had that sort of Irish storytelling quality. And I spent, a number of holidays with him, Christmas, 4th of July, and great guy. But in addition to that, a very, very thoughtful guy. I mean, he was very, very focused on policy. He had a very clear sense of what he wanted to do and what he wanted to accomplish with his presidency, and he stayed locked on. So he was a very interesting guy. Being in the White House, I mean, here I am, this kid from L.A., as you say, a Huntington Beach Oiler, as it were.
I know it.
You're
a long way from home.
I was a long way from home. I reflected at the time that many of my new colleagues in the White House had gone to Ivy League schools and et cetera, and been to prep school.
Yeah, you got a little dirt on your neck.
Right. And so I came from Huntington Beach High School, where we had there was a bronze naked surfer on the lawn of the Huntington Beach High School.
Right.
I mean, that was my high school.
That was a big deal.
Yeah, so there.
I saw Dick Dale play in the Huntington Beach High School
auditorium.
Yeah,
I think I did too. I must have come back for that.
Yeah, he did. I saw him on the reunion tour.
Yeah. But it was definitely an interesting experience. I mean, when you walk into the West Wing of the White House,
Had you ever been there before?
I had been there. I was involved in Republican politics when I was, I think, in high school, or it might have been the first couple of years of undergraduate college. And I'd gone back a couple of times, so I'd taken like a public tour sort of thing. But it's a little bit different when
that's what I was just wondering.
You're waltzed into the residence, upstairs, or as I say, working if your offices are in the West Wing, and you're 20 feet from the Oval Office. It's very, it kind of is what you'd expect it to be. It's exciting. You have a sense of purpose, and you certainly are quite aware that there are things going on of great consequence. What was fun about being in the Reagan administration is that I said the word. There was a sense of purpose, which is to say that the president made it very clear what the agenda was. Of course, this is, as you recall, right after the Carter years, and there had been a certain number of problems, both economic problems and
11% inflation.
Yeah, we had stagflation, and you had the humiliation in the United States with the Iranian hostage situation, which was resolved, as you recall, or any of the audience that remembers their history will recall, it was resolved actually on the day of the inauguration. When the president was inaugurated, the hostages were finally released. But the point is that we had, as a country, we had suffered through some difficult times, and Reagan was incredibly optimistic, incredibly positive, but it was more than that. He had an agenda that he believed would deliver us from that malaise, and I would argue that it did.
I've always thought of the word resolute. I mean, I know that there is the resolute desk in the Oval Office, but from all of I was quite a young person at that time, and Ronald Reagan was my first president, and I always think it's very fitting that here we are in Santa Barbara County, and specifically the San Ynez Valley, and we get to live in a place that he loved.
Yep.
And I've learned more and more through my time here about when he voted in Solvang and ate dinner in Ballard and went to the movies in Buellton and was a true resident of the San Ynez Valley. And one of my good friends' dad was his vet, being Doug Herthel.
Yeah.
And every story I've heard, and you just confirm it a little bit more for me, about how there wasn't two different versions of the man. There was one, and we all got to see it.
Yep, in public and private, same guy.
If you don't mind me asking, you might be the only person I've ever met that's been in the residence part of the White House. Could you tell us what that's a little bit like?
Well, it's not exactly like I was touring.
I assume you weren't laying in the beds.
Each of the going. Let's go bounce on Ron's bed. I resisted that, but It's beautiful, and it's we were mostly in the obviously the entertainment quarters, the living room, if you will, and the dining room. Mm-hmm. I remember, I will tell you one story. When the first time I was invited to the residence, it was Christmas dinner, and.
No big deal.
So the president's, needless to say, at the head of the table, and remember George Will was there, and the Wicks were there, and I was there. And
yeah, you didn't have anywhere to go.
I'm
I
about
guess
32 years old, right? And I sit down, and needless to say, I'm thinking this is. And I was on the White House staff, but that's a little different than being in the residence having Christmas dinner with the president. And so we sit down for dinner, and the president, this is, it was mildly horrific, actually. The president turns to me and says, "Well, Dennis, would you ask the blessing?"
You're kidding. You're kidding.
No. And
You're kidding.
I thought, oh my golly, what exactly does one say or ask for when, the leader of the free world?
Yeah.
And remember, this is the early 80s,
so
we're still in the thick of it.
Yes.
with the then Soviet Union.
You're sitting with number 2 talking to number 1.
Yeah, it is. Exactly. So that was a little bit of pressure. I'm sure it was. Well, he didn't throw me out, so it must have been adequate.
Well, good job. So from your time there, tell us your progression. I mean, I mentioned that you were president of the FCC. Tell us the next steps.
I worked on the White House staff for about 2 years. I should say, since we made reference to it, that what I was doing, I was Associate Director of Presidential Personnel. So the job of the personnel shop in the White House is to interview candidates for presidential appointments. So
really?
if someone is going to be appointed, Assistant Secretary of Defense or Assistant Secretary of State or Secretary of State for that matter.
Really?
Anything that required a Senate confirmation and a direct nomination by the president obviously is a person that's going to be vetted and the FBI background check, and then one has to vet the politics of getting this person confirmed. So all of that is brokered by the personnel shop. So I was Associate Director of Personnel when had a number of agencies, including the Department of Justice, within my purview. So our job was to interview people and make recommendations to the president. So I did that for a couple of years.
What a trusted position.
It was a significant position. I mean, clearly the president is not necessarily going to have candidates for all of them. I mean, there are hundreds of positions that even at the top level, these positions that require Senate confirmation, there's still many of those positions. So the president obviously doesn't have the time to vet 5 candidates for that position and then make a judgment. So that was really our job to make those recommendations. Obviously, at the end of the day, it was the president's call. So that's what we did, and it was an interesting job. But what I was going to say is, and getting back to answer your question, I had all the independent regulatory. I had the Department of Justice. I also had all the independent regulatory agencies in my jurisdiction. So that's the SEC, the ICC, the Federal Communications Commission, all the independent agencies, as well as DOJ. And at that time, this is the early 80s, there was a lot of change on the cusp in the telecommunications and broadcasting industry. Mm-hmm. So I followed with some interest one of my agencies, which was the FCC.
At that time, there was probably, 3-4 channels, maybe.
Yeah.
Not very much. There's no cable television. There's no satellite television. There's no podcasting. There was TV.
And it was analog.
And analog, yes.
And therein lies really the key to the revolution that we've enjoyed in communications. The transition from analog to digital is what made streaming possible, made the proliferation of channel capacity possible. created the possibility of the integration of voice, video, and data, which is another revolution. None of that existed. This is in the early 80s when I was at the White House, and then when I went to the commission, which was at the very end of 1983, and assumed my position really at the beginning of 84. Stayed on for a couple of years, and then the president apparently he remembered my blessing from Christmas because he ended up appointing me chairman of the FCC. So I'm kidding. It probably wasn't my prayer at Christmas. But I served as commissioner for a few years and then was appointed chairman in 1987. But getting back to the more important story, the changes in telecom that were going on were phenomenal. So you had the transition from analog to digital, you had the optimization of satellite capacity and the use of satellite capacity for the distribution of broadcast signals, which hadn't been done. HBO, I think, was the first to do that. Cable at the time was an antenna service. I mean, cable, as you probably know, was a technology that was intended to effectively extend the antenna of a broadcast television community where they couldn't get over the air.
Run pipe right to the house.
Yeah, run pipe to the house as a way of taking the three networks that we had at the time and getting those signals into homes where there was interference that would preclude that. But then someone had the bright idea, well, wait a second, why do we just have to retransmit the three over-the-air broadcast networks that we have? Why can't we create new channels, new programming? And that was a bit of a revolution. But
I think you're underselling how big of a revolution that is, because one of the aspects that I was just thinking about as you were saying that, like currently, we could talk about it later, I always think like SpaceX is very important. I see those rockets go off and I watch them all the time. And one of the things that I have seen from just that transfer or that transformative system is there were so many people that were still on AOL dial-up up until just a few years ago that are living in rural places in this country where their only way to get the internet was either a very, very slow satellite system or AOL dial-up. And now anybody in the continental United States can go buy a Starlink and put it on top of their house, and they have high-speed internet access, and they're up to speed with every single person that lives in a city.
Right.
I didn't mean to derail you, but as you were saying that, one of the things that was just popping in my mind is when you entered that that working at the White House, if no one had an email address, right, and by the time you're leaving, that's definitely transforming.
Right, it's transforming towards certainly by the time I was leaving the commission in 1989 at the end of the Reagan administration. But no, you make a really good point. I was lucky enough to be there and lucky enough to be in particular on the FCC at a time of just seismic change. And as your example points out, there are changes that take place that are incremental, and then there are other changes that profoundly change everything.
There are years nothing happens, and then there are days that decades happen.
Yeah, that decades happen, and I was witness and arguably party to a couple of those changes that occurred.
And trying to figure out how to navigate it, in all honesty.
Trying to figure out, because those were uncharted territories.
Wild West.
So just as one example, when I transitioned from the White House to the FCC as a commissioner, before I became chairman of the FCC, I was a commissioner for some period of time before I became chairman. But in any case, you go back to January of 1984. January of 1984 was when the divestiture of AT&T became effective. Now, for our listeners out there that have no recollection of this, we used to have Just like we had 3 broadcast networks for television, and all of your programming decisions were made by 3 individuals in New York that decided what you were going to watch, which is, by the way, no longer the case. More on that later.
Yes.
In telephony, there was one company, and it was called AT&T, and it provided both long distance, and it owned all of the local telephone operators as well. It was Ma Bell. A judge named Judge Green, a federal district court judge, who heard an antitrust case against AT&T, found that that was anti-competitive, violated the antitrust, or AT&T had violated the antitrust laws, and so decided that AT&T had to be broken up. He did not decide what was to follow the breakup of AT&T. So that fell to the FCC to figure out. That was a huge sort of systemic change in the provision of telecommunications. So we had a decision to make. One footnote. When I was appointed, as I say, at the end of '83, I assumed my position at the commission in early 1984. It was literally at the very start of, it was almost literally the day that AT&T was broken up and we had a new world order. And I remember someone saying, or me saying, they said, well, you know, I was a business litigation lawyer. I mean, I'm really not all that well versed, certainly in telephony, you know, in telecommunications. And the guy I was talking to was already at the commission. He says, well, it really doesn't matter because no one knows anything now because all of the rules just changed. And that was very much the case. The reason I raised this is it kind of ties together a couple of points that we've already been talking about. One, huge change, seismic change in regulation that ends up affecting real people. It ends up affecting all of us. But secondly, policy and politics and Ronald Reagan. When AT&T was broken up, the presumption was, and it certainly was the position of the telephone industry, the incumbent existing telephone industry, that AT&T would continue to own and control long distance, and there would be separate companies that would control, as monopolies, as regulated monopolies, telephone service, telephony in the various areas. And those,
similar to airline industries kind of back in the day.
Yeah, exactly. And so the assumption was that there would be, that AT&T would be broken up, but the provision of telephone service would still be essentially a monopoly service. They would just be smaller monopolies that covered less geography, if you will. The reason for that, I don't want to get too far into the weeds here, but a little bit into the weeds. The argument in favor of having telephone service be provided by a monopoly service provider was the assumption that the provision of telephone service was a natural monopoly. And a natural monopoly it's an economic notion, but it's basically the argument that the provision of that service, the cost of providing that service will always fall over the demand curve. So the more demand you have, which is to say the more service you're providing, which is to say if you're a monopoly, you're always going to be able to provide the service cheaper than if you break it up and there's 2 companies doing it. That would be
two wires versus one wire.
Yeah. So
is that kind of similar to say PG&E in
it's
California?
the same. It's the same assumption. And by the way, it's bogus. It's complete. And that's where I'm going with this
let's
story.
go, baby. I love this.
No, it's a completely bogus assumption. The assumption of a natural monopoly, again, is it's always going to be cheaper and therefore better for the people if there's only one provider because it's always going to be cheaper. But no one ever tests that. And in the case of telephony, no one had ever tested that. So I'm at the FCC and I say to one of my guys who's on my staff, who's an economist, I say, well, what about
do some math here.
Yeah, what do you think? To which he said, well, first of all, it's never been tested, and I doubt it's true. I don't think it is a natural monopoly. Well, how do we find out? We open it up for competition. And this gets back to Reagan. So Reagan had a couple of rules and principles he lived by. And one was that free markets are good. and that competition is good, and that regulation is generally bad. So we went into, once I was at the commission, I was at an independent agency. So it's not like the president was calling us, telling us what to do. He didn't really have any input after I left. But philosophically, we were very much in tune. So we basically said to the telephone industry after divestiture, hey, you know what? You're telling it's a natural monopoly. If it is a natural monopoly, because you have all of the market now, no one will be able to compete with you. If you're right that costs are always cheaper when you're providing more and more service to more and more customers, then no one's going to be able to compete with you anyway. So what are you worried about? So we opened up the industry to competition. First thing we did is we said, Sprint, you want to compete with AT&T? Be our guest.
Southern Pacific Railroad. That's what Sprint stands for, right?
Yeah.
Southern Pacific Railroad International Telephone or something like that.
And that had to do with how they achieved rights of way.
Yeah, they got the right of way by running them down the railways.
Very important.
Amazing.
But basically, again, forgive me, Keith, because I am getting kind of into the weeds here, but it's important, and it's a philosophical point as well. It's like, well, let's open it up and see. And so the FCC made a ruling that from now on, anybody that wants to compete, assuming you meet certain criteria, can compete. And what happened? Prices came down. It was not a natural monopoly.
Well, number one, I want to say thank you for coming on. This is going to be a couple-part episode, everybody, just so you guys know. So you've been listening to Chopping It Up with 105.9 on Crazy Country. Come with us next week, Saturday. We'll be talking with Dennis Patrick about his history with the Reagan White House, breakup of AT&T, telecommunications, and we're going to get into the weeds a little bit more. See you next week, ladies and gentlemen.